I'm Mary O'Carroll, Chief Community Officer at Ironclad, and you're listening to Pearls On, Gloves Off. Today, my guest is Dawn Hinz. Dawn is the Director of Legal Operations at Avery Dennison. She sits on the law department's leadership team and is responsible for delivery of the strategy and day-to-day operations of the global law department, focused on continuous process improvement, self-service enablement, and effective resource allocation. She comes with a blend of over 20 years of industry and consulting experience and is an experienced professional with a proven track record of driving operational excellence through leveraging people, process, and technology to innovate and drive efficiencies in the way work is transacted. Prior to joining Avery Dennison to establish the legal ops function, she was global legal technology leader at Dell Technologies. I've known Dawn for a while, and the thing about Dawn is she really knows her stuff. We all know there's a lot of people out there who are good at being a talking head or can talk about legal ops at a high level, but Dawn is a real deal. No fluff here, just real experience and leadership. And as we get into later in the episode, she has a zero tolerance for mediocrity. Dawn holds herself, her team, and others to a high standard of excellence when it comes to work product, but also when it comes to work ethic and attitude. She's not afraid of a tough challenge. When we get in this conversation, we talk about her move from Dell to Avery Dennison and how she made the choice to join that new organization. We talk about how to work creatively and to think strategically, to leverage an army of vendors and service providers to get things done so that you can quarterback the work without getting too in the weeds and without doing the heavy lifting yourself. That's critical to being a strategic leader. We talk about how to elevate the impact of what you're doing, how to prioritize, how to know the value of your initiatives, how to set expectations about what it takes to do something well. And finally, we talk about program management as really a core skill and a key to success, what to look for in a new team hire, and we close with the very cool idea of a leadership mindset. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Dawn. Welcome to the show. Good to see you as always.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me.
So you are now the Director of Legal Ops at Avery Dennison. I know that Avery Dennison makes labels because I use them to print addresses every Christmas for my holiday cards. But I know that they also do a lot more than that. So just very quickly, do you mind enlightening our audience on kind of what Avery Dennison does as a company?
Sure. So, yes, most commonly you're familiar with all of the labels that you see at Office Depot and things of that nature, but much more than that. So, when you think of when we were just material science, just actual labor labels in terms of sticky paper, things of that nature, everything from medical tape to all of your like clothing labels, sports team labels, street signage, car wraps, really anything of that nature. But moving pretty rapidly into the space of digital labeling now as well.
Just yet another company that is a traditional company that's becoming a tech company.
Yeah, we say we're, kind of bridging the gap between the physical and the digital.
Yeah. You've been there a few years. What does the legal department look like? How big is it? What are the practice areas?
Sure. So as a company, we're global. So in over 50 countries, we're over 34,000 people as a company. Within the legal department, we have about 60 full-time employees, obviously highly staff augmented with outside counsel. We are segregated regionally in terms of we have regional legal teams. And then from a global standpoint, we have functions like ethics compliance, intellectual property, corporate governance, and M&A.
And you are director of legal ops, but you're also in a lot of ways chief of staff. Isn't that correct?
Essentially, yes. Mhm.
Yeah. So what does your role entail there? And do you have a team? Is it just you?
I do have a team. I have 2 direct reports, but I would say I have several other individuals you could consider somewhat dotted line to me. There's
Sure.
folks in IT in terms of legal IT business partners that are focused on holistically on legal IT technology implementations. We have contract administrators in each of the regions as well. That as we globalize or standardize processes across the department, those folks are highly interlocked with my team as well as other legal support staff as it relates to spend and matter management. And then in regards to some large scale technology implementations that we have going on, we have outside implementation partners and consultants helping as well. So really my role, encompasses all the legal department's responsibilities that are not, practicing the law itself. So everything from spend management to anything related to what we call, from a strategic priority standpoint, operational excellence. So driving efficiency, productivity, streamlining, say communication. So what do we have in terms of, department communications, but what are we also doing to keep the business informed? So obviously, highly focused on change management when we're doing some of our large scale tech implementations. So really a little bit of everything. So kind of driving
Everything.
that operating model, or also taking a step back and understanding how things were done before and what can we do to better kind of elevate our service delivery model with some of our tech implementations. So as folks are so strapped for bandwidth, what can we do to offload some of that high volume, repetitive, lower risk work to either automate it or kind of shift who's doing it, so folks can focus on the more complex, the higher value work.
Yeah, and am I imagining did you tell me that you were also chief of staff, or is that, something that I made up?
No, I do that stuff as well. It's really all encompassing. So anything to do with the department operations, and then really anything our CLO needs to support him on, whether it's, a deck for a board meeting or you name it. Maybe that's what I like about the role. It's ever
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah, and so do you see those as kinda 2 different hats or groups of responsibilities, or do you see that really is that just kind of one role that is merged together? And I'm asking because there's so many different models nowadays where we see a director of legal ops with a separate person who's the chief of staff. Sometimes there's a chief of staff either reporting to or legal ops is reporting to that person. How do you see it in your org? And do you think that's the right way to set it up? And are there different ways that work?
From my perspective, I guess I just see myself as wearing a couple of hats. So I think there's,
Mhm.
the hat that I wear as the legal operations director, that I, interlock with the folks that report to me and team members in terms of execution on. And then there's the other aspects of my role that I would say I work directly with the CLO on, that don't necessarily require me to engage my team, may require me to engage others on our leadership team. But I
Yep.
kind of look at that as different hats. And in some case, that part where I work directly with the CLO may require me to work directly with, HR or comms or other things of that nature. For me, it's all part of my role, but in terms of who I interlock with, it really depends on the nature of the work.
Yeah, it's so interesting how everyone you speak to in these roles has it defined a different way. I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is the 2 roles or 2 hats that you wear. Sometimes, that's very common, like, the way, people do both those roles
Mhm.
is pretty common. I think that's best practice. I don't like it when they're split up because I think the legal ops and the chief of staff, essentially, whether they're the same person or not, have the same goals and objectives, and they really kinda need to be working almost as one person if they're not one person. Now, were you the first legal ops person at Avery Dennison?
I was, yes, or I am, yes. About 3 years ago, I was contacted actually by a headhunter, in regards to the role. So had some, collaborative discussions for several months before I actually decided to take the position and step into the role. But personally, I like that. I like stepping into somewhat uncharted territories. It's,
Yeah.
challenging, which I also kind of embrace, but it also gives you the ability to, um, kind of charter your own path, and so I like that aspect of it.
And you had done it before, which we'll get to, but what was it like when you set up? And you described kind of what you do, but was that all defined or did you kind of have to come in and define it for yourself? You do report to the CLO, I believe, and was what the role well defined in his mind of what he wanted, or was it just hire the right smart person and let them figure it out?
I think a combination of both. The role is not well defined. I think there were core aspects of a legal operations role that were an expectation, or were kind of brass tacks in terms of had to get done. But in terms of how they get done, he was looking at me to really make that happen. So I think when you
Yeah.
think of, spend and matter management, your vendor management, things of that nature, I would say those I consider kind of run rate work that, needs to happen and needs to happen seamlessly. We've done a lot of work since I've joined to, replace our e-billing solution and things of that nature. But I think those aspects of the role were somewhat well defined in terms of someone who could take that run rate legal operations work, make sure that it happens, and make sure that it happens, seamlessly, and where there are any either undefined or defined but broken processes, put in place
Hmm.
process and kind of solution any gaps or shore up any gaps in those processes. And then CLM, as you're aware, has been a big initiative for so many, but it was a priority for me to step in and define our legal technology roadmap and
Hmm.
prioritize what's going to happen and really execute that roadmap. So bring it to life. And so that was an expectation as well. But in terms of how to do that, he was really looking at me to do that, coming from a department which we can talk a little bit about in the past that was very focused on digital transformation of the law department. I was able to bring some of that in to this role as well because as our company is evolving, so we are shifting from just a physical labeling company to a digital labeling company. Like many others, the company itself is going through an evolution and a digital transformation. But in
Right.
tandem, we need to go through one as well because as our company grows, the law department's not going to grow at the same speed. So, what can we do to really enable our team members to do more with less? Or what can we do to enable the department to do more with less? And I think there's, people, process, and technology aspects of that. From a process perspective, maybe what is some work that we're doing in the law department that isn't necessarily the role of legal. So maybe we need to take a
Hmm.
step back and shift that work either to the right function, department, or even, outsource it. Do we have the right people? So even the people that the skill sets that folks had 10 years ago, I think things are evolving. And it's great, for me from a legal operations function. I think historically, when people thought of a law department, they think of just attorneys. We know there's much work that happens in a law department that doesn't necessarily require attorneys to do it, and then there's a lot of work that attorneys do that doesn't necessarily require attorneys. So it's how do we shift the right work into the right people's hands, and then from technology, I see technology as an enabler. Where do we either have solutions in place that are maybe archaic or we need
Yep.
to replace, rip out, or you have a solution. So you check the box. Yes, we have that tool, but are we really optimizing it, using it what it's for? Things of that nature. And then where do we have manual processes or opportunities to really be transformative to put in place new technology? So that's been a key focus, since I stepped into the role, replaced our e-billing solution, integrate it with our accounts payable solution so that we're actually, kind of being able to, I wouldn't say automate, there's still some gaps, but, have that piece of spend and
Yeah.
matter management operate rather seamlessly so that I can also shift my small but mighty team to focus on the priority work like implementation of our CLM solution, which we've procured as well. We're, we've done several tech projects since I've stepped into the role. So having done that in my, prior experience, that's been helpful. It was a really, transferable skill into
Yeah.
this role.
How hard was it for you to come in and look around and decide, this is archaic, we need something new? Someone else must have put that in place and made that decision, to decide to rip and replace can sometimes cause some friction in the organization. Was that an issue for you, or was it very clear and was your CLO just behind you, or how did that come about?
He was behind me. Was it hard for me? No, but it's always interesting to me. Some people are so attached to technology.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm pretty attached to my phone, or I don't know, but it's interesting to me how attached people can be to, an archaic application. Like when you switched from, say, Lotus Notes to Outlook in a role, I don't know,
Right.
that was really like concerning to me. But yes, you have people that are very resistant to change. I think part of a key skill of a legal operations function is, being a change agent, being able to influence, and it's really being able to tell that value proposition and tailor it to who it is that you're talking to. And then at some point, it's this is the way we're going. Get on board
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's functions behind our previous e-billing solution that were very manual behind the scenes. Sure, it didn't impact you. You're used to using the tool you've always used, but there's a whole bunch of manual work that's happening behind the scenes that we need to automate. There's definitely some resistance from just a user experience standpoint. It's getting folks to use something different that they're not
Yeah.
familiar with. And I think it's taken a while, but I think that kind of goes into, making sure you choose the right tools, making sure you engage the right vendors so that you can really kind of develop those partnerships to help ease the pain as much as you can.
Right, and you had older systems in there. I kind of sometimes wonder it's often the new leader's job is in the legal ops position to come in, assess, find the things that are old, pull them out, or put things in that are new. I kind of wonder if you never showed up, would your department still look the same now, or do you think something naturally would have would someone have raised their hand and said, "This is broken, we should change it"?
I think someone would have raised their hand and said, "This is broken, we should change it," but do I think that it would have got changed? No, I just think from a
Yeah,
bandwidth perspective and from a skill set perspective and putting in place a ripping something out, putting something new in, or just taking some manual processes and putting in new tech, it's a lift, right? So even as
yeah,
we're undergoing a CLM implementation right now, the nirvana at the end of the day when you have full end-to-end CLM at a global company like ours in place will be transformative and a huge value add, not just for the law department, but for the company as a whole. But the work to bring that to life is pretty extensive. So, do I think
yeah.
that it would have happened? No.
Yeah, you really need someone to come in and be dedicated to this change management and change agency and all the work that needs to get done. Now, I know that you came from Dell where you already had legal ops experience, and that's pretty rare to be able to hire someone these days who has enterprise wide digital transformation and legal ops experience. So, curious because I know that you could have probably walked into a lot of companies. How did I guess advice for those who are looking for the right fit? I think a lot of us talk about if you're going to do legal ops, you have to have a good relationship with your CLO, your GC. It's got to be a good cultural fit. The role needs to be scoped correctly. What did you look for in a new role, in a leader when you're evaluating this? And what are the things, the flags that you want to look out for?
So making sure,
Yeah.
I really clicked with the CLO and the leadership team. And I wanted to feel like I felt like they were making the right choice in me and had belief in my abilities, and that I felt like they were folks that really had a healthy culture, that there was, trust amongst one another, that there felt like they gave each other the benefit of the doubt, that they were collaborative,
Yeah.
and I think it was really the people that got me to take the role. I think sometimes the work is not always super sexy in terms of what it is that needs to get done, and it's no doubt that it's going to be a challenge because like you said, change management is, a huge part of the role. I think it's, managing relationships, it's, being a people connector, and the change management piece is often pushing change that people didn't necessarily ask for. And
Mm,
so I think ensuring that you have that right level of support, that you can have an open conversation, because stepping into a new company where you don't have a decade of relationships that you had before and everything's new, it is challenging, right? So knowing that you can bring in the skill set that maybe doesn't exist. So you're bringing something to the table, but also being honest, with myself to say, but in order to be successful, I also have this gap in, knowledge and understanding of the, organizational design of the company, and this gap in understanding of, you know, this problem that I'm going to have to solve. And I think just being able to openly talk about those things so I could get support to get the resources that I felt are needed to be successful was something that was important to me. I think the culture is great. We have a great leadership team, and I feel really blessed in that it was the right decision to come here.
yeah, you and I have known each other for some time, and you've
Mhm,
mentioned many times how blessed you feel to be
mhm.
in that seat and to have a great CLO who's super supportive. Is that something that you wanted to be sure you had before you took the role?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also, coming from a law department previously when I worked at Dell that had ebbs and flows, like 550, sometimes more people, sometimes, less. Moving to a department where we have approximately 60 folks globally, I can
Yeah,
really get to know almost everyone. And so that's
yeah,
achievable. Like I felt like it's hard to build relationships, with 500 and something people, but it's actually feasible, when the department's a bit smaller, but I also
yep,
didn't want something so small to where, sometimes you talk to someone who's the head of legal operations, their law department's 7 people and their legal ops function is 1, and it's hard to, collaborate in theory on certain topics because the situation's different, but yeah, so culture was important to me. The collaborative nature of the team was important as well.
yeah, and you were the first one, but you said you have a team now. How did that come about? I know some people get stuck being the party of one for a long time,
Yeah.
and, how do you get your first head? How do you advocate for it?
To an extent, again, I feel blessed in this sense. So I do have an individual that reports to me who's been at the company over 17 years, and she is an expert in, I would say, spend and matter management as it relates to Avery Dennison and all the intricacies of things with that process, and has been involved with it for so long. When I took the role, she moved to report to me. And I've recently hired another individual who is a really strong background in contract management that will report to me to help as an Ironclad administrator as we
Nice.
stand up our CLM platform. And so I have two direct reports. And then, like I said, in terms of our contract administrators, there's an aspect of their role that, the processes get driven from my team as the same for our spend and matter management, accruals, litigation
Yeah.
reports, things of that nature. But then really right now I'm augmented with, support from a few different consulting groups to bring the platform to life. So in terms of direct reports, just two, but I always tell people too, in terms of even leadership, you can be a leader even without having, a big team. You need to work
For
creatively.
sure.
So I think when I think of the legal operations function, I think of what can we do to think strategically, be those thought leaders, be those strategic advisors, so that in some cases we're quarterbacking the work but not doing it all. So is there work that we
Yes.
can leverage the contract admins for that the paralegals should be doing so that we are defining and driving the process and operationalizing it as opposed to doing all of the underlying lift.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be
Yeah.
feasible with as lean as my team is. But I
That's right.
leverage the folks too. I have an IT business partner that you could say kind of dotted lines. I would say spends 85% of their time with my team. And so from an org structure standpoint, it might look like my team is very lean. It is,
Yep.
but we work creatively to get things done.
No, I mean, I know you have an army of vendors working for you and outside consultants and managed service providers, and I think that's in my view, it's actually best practice. So if you can keep your head count lean and outsource a lot of the work that's more mundane, more day to day, I mean, you wanna keep the higher
Mhm.
value, high touch stuff internally, and I love the way you set up your own role in that you're much more strategic and the quarterback, as you put it, the orchestrator of everything that's
Mhm.
happening. Like, you should be having the big ideas, put them in motion, decide how it should look and
Mhm.
be executed, and then be able to point to different people to get those things running and, stay up here and let people run down here,
Yep.
and you've done that. So I guess my question, was that hard to get those resources, whether it was headcount or your outside resources, or did you always have that level of support when you walked into this organization?
I would say I had to put the business case together specifically as it relates to CLMs in terms of I think I had the support to define a technology roadmap and bring it to life, but I had to
Mhm.
do the work to justify it. And so
Yeah,
I think that's an area that I even have as an opportunity in myself. I think sometimes there's a lot of work to get done. And so I think prioritization and time management's an essential skill. But I think
sure.
also being able to elevate the impact of what you're doing. So, because if you're just looking at things in terms of the tool cost this much, it's going to cost, well, but if you can flip the script in terms of what's the value that it's going to provide, or you get alignment on that North Star vision, for lack of a better way to put it, I think it's also being honest and pragmatic about what it's going to take to get that done. And, even thinking of releasing things in like a minimum viable product and scaling from
Mhm.
there and getting alignment. Because if you just focus on end to end, full blown CLM across, I mean, we're a global company, right? And so we have a lot of
Yeah.
templates and things of that nature. And some templates that, we have to do the work and we're doing the work to rationalize those templates because why am I going to configure 8 if I can have one dynamic
Yep.
template and things of that nature. So breaking it down into different work streams. And like you said, I do have several teams that you could say report to me, work under me,
Yeah, yeah.
outsource, but really marching it in terms of different work streams really helps me to kind of compartmentalize. So if I'm thinking of, migrating, active agreements to a repository and, you know, extracting data from those or doing quality check on the data that is extracted. Then you have template rationalization. Then you could say workflow configuration of those templates. So that's really how I kind of operate. And, part of it, there's a big strategic focus with legal operations, but I also think it's a bit of program management as well, right? Because people say it's kind of like project management. Sure, but it's 15 projects at once. So I think it's more of a program manager and what can you do to prioritize and make sure the needle's moving amongst all, but while
Yep.
also being able to elevate the impact along the way of what's been accomplished. Because it might take 2 years, sometimes longer, to truly achieve certain things. And I think the ongoing investment gets harder if you're not proving value along the way.
Yeah, it's so important. You gotta and setting the expectations correctly up front, proving the value, then being smart about asking for the resources at the right
Mhm.
time. And I like that you mentioned program management, not just project management. And it's funny, I had a conversation with another legal ops director from a different large company the other day, and he was saying out of all the skill sets that are needed to be successful in legal ops, program management is probably the one that the least people have a strong sense or strong experience or good skill set for program management. There's a lot of folks who are good at executing and tactics and kind of here's the project and here's what needs to get
Yeah.
done. But being able to, like you said, orchestrate, step back and know the big picture of all the pieces and how to resource each of them and how to put them in order, the roadmap, thinking creatively and differently. I think I agree with him. That's probably not something we see in a lot of folks' roles.
And you know what's interesting to me, Mary? I started my career at Ernst and Young. So I was a boomerang employee at Ernst and Young. I've worked there both in Chicago and now I live in Austin and I worked in the Austin office as well. And when I was a IT auditor and consultant, when you work in a consulting company, I may have this manager who I may not even be working on audits with or
Totally.
projects that I'm consulting on. So I've always kind of carried that through in my career and saying you can work with folks that maybe aren't like in your same small team. So I was a SOX program manager at Dell. When I came to Dell, I actually was in basically an IT audit role, and then I stepped in to be the SOX program manager. So it's funny, inherently, that is kind of my background. And when you think of audit, you think of risk and controls. And I think if starting my career, one thing that they taught us is like really kind of how do you understand business process? Because how are you going to understand where something went wrong if you don't understand the end to end process? And so understanding things like preventative controls, detective controls, what can we do to prevent something from going wrong or what can we do to detect it if it went wrong? And then moving into a SOX program, it's understanding what are our internal controls, are they operating effectively? And how do we test those controls? And then moving into the legal department, also very focused on mitigation of risk, right? And so there's so many transferable skills. And while it seems
Yeah.
like maybe I did a career change, I don't know, 13 plus years ago or whatever, when I moved into the law department, there's similarities or synergies, you could say.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Being that you were in risk and audit and then went to legal, I would have guessed you would have been much more risk averse, but maybe because you program managed some of that, you had to be the one that was taking risks and pushing for things to be different. I wonder because I know that you are very creative and innovative and like to challenge the status quo. So I don't see you as being that risk averse, I think.
Yeah,
Would you
I don't
agree?
think so. I think sometimes maybe I have a strong ability to understand a business process, and I think inefficiency is what irks me. So sometimes you find a
Yes.
business process and you're like, "Oh my goodness." And so in understanding where do we need those control points, you probably don't need 5 of those control points. And I think smart risk is the way that I like to put it. It's kind of that likelihood and impact. What's the likelihood of something happens? If it does go wrong, what's the impact that it's going to have? And where do we make those choice points? And so I do think there's a balance, right? Because we want
Yeah.
the business to understand the risks, the legal risks that they need to consider when they're making certain business decisions, but also in terms of operating efficiently and effectively. Because if you're too risk averse, you're going to slow everything down and be seen as a bottleneck. So, with my role
Yeah.
being to drive efficiency, drive productivity, how do we do so in a way that sufficiently mitigates the risk? I guess you would say.
I'm chuckling because you said you get irked by inefficiency. And I think
Mhm.
that you and I were together at some point, I don't know, at a conference or an event, laughing and bonding over that. The fact that we both have very low tolerance for mediocrity. And
Yes.
that is true
Yes.
not just for people, but processes and things where we just see this can be, that can be so much better. I can't unsee it
Yep.
is the way I always say. And I know you're the same way. Like it will drive you crazy if you can't, you know how much better it could be and it's not there.
Yes, and it's so interesting if you even think of, discerning talent or what do you look for in people or how do people develop certain skills. I think there's, one having that growth mindset, wanting to learn, seeking to understand is very important, but also grit is so important. And that's one skill. I don't know how you instill that in someone. Like it's you're kind of born with it. And maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's how my parents raised me or something like
Yep.
that, but
Yep.
it's inherent, and when someone doesn't have it, those are the things that drive me a bit crazy.
Yeah. I hear you. We have that in common. And
Mhm.
I totally agree. Let's go to your Dell experience for a moment because that is where you learned about legal ops. That's where you had your first role. And like you just said, you transitioned from the risk and audit team. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm having brain lapse in terms of what we called our team back then, but it was essentially we did our Sarbanes-Oxley compliance work, and then we moved into the audit function. So originally, I was in finance. We moved into the audit function, which was still connected to finance, and then I moved into a role in the legal department on the corporate team, actually. And so
Okay.
I was the global legal knowledge management and technology manager, I believe was the original role that I took. And there was not a legal operations function in place at that time. So we had
Yep.
two individuals. One sat in litigation and one also sat in the corporate team that reported uh, to our corporate secretary and AGC, and they did all of the, spend and matter management, but there wasn't a formal legal operations function. There had never been a
Yeah.
legal technology roadmap or someone in my role, so that was a new role that I stepped into as well. Few months into the role, we established a legal operations function. So there was a little bit of an org restructuring, and it was just the three of us. So I was one of the OGs on the legal operations team at Dell as well. By the time I left 3 years ago to move into my role at Avery Dennison, I think legal operations had 30 people. So we were a rather large
Wow.
legal operations function. At that point in time, knowledge management technology was a pillar, spend and matter management was a pillar, business intelligence was a pillar. We did, like, client training, so we had an individual that would take training, and she had a really strong background, maybe from, like, LexisNexis or something, and we'd do kind of those bite-sized brain shark videos and things like that. She was really talented, and then we
Huh.
had the internal, like, skill and career development in the law department, so we had different pillars and different teams underneath each of those, and then a team that was focused on, CLM as well, and it grew pretty quickly over the years. It was interesting, even in the tech team at one point in time, I think I had 6 direct reports when I led that team, and so we did some large scale technology implementations there as well, a lot of integrations, and so I see some synergies in the company that I work at now as well, as where, sometimes people think of like an accounts payable system. Well, when you're at a company like Avery Dennison or a company like Dell Technologies, you may have 10 accounts payable systems. You may have a different, payroll system in, different countries. You may have so the landscape, the technology architecture can be rather complex, and so truly bringing something to life like spend and matter management globally can be rather complex.
Yeah, and how different was Dell from where Avery Dennison is today? And I mean, it's a very different organization, different culture, size, the history of legal ops there. What was kind of surprising to you, or was it what you expected?
Very different. I think I like being in a role now where the culture is a much better fit for me. I think in terms of getting things done, I like being in a role where the leadership team entrusts in me. I can have those collaborative discussions across the leadership team as well as with, my boss, the CLO, to then make a decision and move as opposed to kind of churn on decisions for a long time when it
Yeah,
relates to the things that I need to get done. Now, does that
yeah,
happen on certain topics that we collaborate on as a leadership team? Absolutely. But
yeah,
in terms of if the objective is clear in terms of this is what you want me to achieve, and I can garner alignment on how I'd like to approach it, also being strategically agile, right? Because sometimes you have to pivot. And I think that's a important lesson for any legal ops leader as well, is sometimes you're going to I think there are a point where you make a decision. Do we need to turn the corner or not? But I think being able to be empowered in your role is important. Being able to get the support you need. if you need it is important because I do think there are
Yeah.
certain messages that, can be strong enough coming from me. There's other messages that will have more meat behind them if they come from the CLO. But I think being able to balance when to pull those levers is important as well. So things don't kind of fall flat if you're having, the CLO send a company wide email every week. That's not going to have the same traction as if you make good choices in terms of when to leverage those modalities.
Yeah, you're out there and building the relationships
Mhm.
and stuff really helps to get stuff done. As I hear you talk and as I've known you for a while, there are a lot of qualities that I think you possess that make you successful in your role, but more importantly, as a leader and a strategic leader and a strategic asset to your department. As you build your team, what do you look for when you interview and how do what are the keys to success, do you think? And we talked about a few of them, right? Program management skills, influencing, grit, of course. But are there things that you look for in the way that you hire and build a team, either, in the past or now? And how do you sort of look for those? And how do you discern those?
How do they optimize the use of their time? Because I think in this role, if you come in thinking that you know everything, like you will not be successful because I learn something new every day. I enjoy the folks that report to me, the folks that I, work with on a daily basis, and I want to ensure that we continue to really enhance that culture. I think Avery Dennison as a whole has a really good culture. But in terms of work ethic, I think it's understanding, asking specific questions because someone can look really good on paper, but then actually understanding how do they communicate as well because
Yeah.
you're working with the business and to an extent you're creating your brand, right? And so if you think as the legal operations lead, you're going to be the one that can be the FaceTime with everyone that we interact with. That's not achievable either. So if these people are going to be an extension of the department, that's the department's brand. That's the brand of legal operations. And so understanding how they would approach things. Are they a strong communicator? With tech implementation, sometimes you have someone that might have that really strong technical background, but then being able to explain it in layman's terms to
Yes.
the department or to, I mean, even leadership. Yes, they're brilliant, but you need to executize the message. And so I'd like
Yes.
to
Yes.
understand how someone might tailor I call it like click down communication. So if I'm gonna send something to, the C-suite, it's gonna be different than I'm gonna send to the legal leadership team. It's gonna be different than I'm gonna send to all the contract administrators and the folks that are working on the project. So what can you do to tailor the message, and asking them those questions because change management. So I guess that's how I assess questions to how do you approach operationalizing something with these different groups, even from user experience or understanding the value to them is different, right? It's putting yourself in like the shoes of the customer. And so really asking them those questions though to see how they will respond. And is it genuine as well? Because I think we can all read a lot of articles and we know all the buzzwords that are out there these days, but just are they genuine? Do you feel like that's an individual that will mesh well, have the trust and respect across the team, brings a skill set to the table as well that either we need more of or is lacking? I'm not strong in every skill, so I think that's a strength as a leader as well as being able to identify where you're weak and where you can't do something to where you need to bring someone in with that skill set to shore up the gap as well. So it's being able to look at my own skill set, understanding where I need someone to fill a gap, and then those other skill sets that I feel like everyone in a legal operations function needs to possess.
Yeah. You totally nailed it. If I were trying to hire someone, I would want you on my interview panel because I think you nailed exactly all the things that we should be looking for. And that's also a very rare unicorn, right, that exists out there who can do these things, but they do exist, and, you're one of them. I've met others who are in that space. And the other question I was gonna ask you, which I think you kind of already answered, is, advice for legal ops professionals or people who wanna get into this space on how to
Oh, yeah.
truly be, a leader and be strategic and, like, to how to lead the team and how to run the department. I think you kind of said, all those qualities to me are the same. The reason I ask is because one of my big goals in life is to educate all the GCs and the
Mhm.
CLOs out there on what this role really means, how to hire for it, how to look for the right people to make sure that you get
Yeah.
what you want to out of the role, right? If you don't hire the right person with the right skill set, you're not going to get, what you're delivering at your role right now. So, what can we do to help coach these GCs and CLOs about scoping and hiring correctly? And I get frustrated when they say, it has to be a lawyer, or it has to have someone who has worked with contracts, or it has to be someone who has this specific technical skill. And I'm curious your response, because I guess I'm going to answer for myself, which is those things to me can be learned. All the tactical how-to skills, those are transferable skills. Those are things that can be learned. But all the things that you mentioned that are just about how do you communicate? How do you work with people? What is your culture? Do you have grit? Do you have resilience? Can you
Mhm.
roll up your sleeves? And can you work with executive teams? That's much harder to teach.
Yep. So I think 2 things, Mary, and maybe I segregated into 2 pieces. So one thing I think as current legal operations leaders, or I'll just say that I could do better, that I think some of us could do better, is elevate the impact that our role has. So that it's not just seen as we, run these kind of core elements of the department, but what is the impact that we have?
Yeah.
So we've,
Yeah.
I've done things around where we are today in different categories, a maturity model and where we want to be. And the cool thing is, the needle's moved like halfway since I've joined. I mean, I'm not taking credit for everything that's been done, but strategically, we've been able to outline what is that gap between where we are and where we want to be? And what are we also doing to elevate that message to the right people so that we can not garner new support for the function. We have the function, but to maintain the function, I think is important. But then I think be able to share some of that messaging with folks that are aspiring to get into the role or with
Yep.
companies that have maybe an appetite that need to be able to get support to add the headcount. So I think in order to elevate that impact, that would be important. And then in terms, because I think it's two different questions, if I understand correctly. One is, what do you do to garner support to even put that function in place in the law department to begin with? And then two, what do you do to find the right types of people for the role? And I think there's different skill sets. I think there's different skill sets in terms of someone that you're going to bring in to form the function
Hmm.
versus the other folks that that person might need on their team
Correct.
to. But I would encourage folks too, and I know you've been a trailblazer in this industry, and I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I've always looked up to you, consider you, a mentor in the space. But I think people need to tap into those networks as well, because I would say, when I reach out to you, I don't even, it's been a few years ago now, right? Like you were more than willing to have a conversation with me, and I am so grateful for that. But I would be as well if someone would reach out to me, and but I think a lot of us don't use those opportunities enough or don't seek the opportunity, because if you're the person looking for the role or looking to learn more, then what are you doing to
Yeah.
learn more about the role? Because I think if you're going to wait till everything falls in your lap, you might get lucky, but otherwise I think you have to take initiative in these organizations. I mean, especially if it's someone in college now, I think the memberships are like pennies, but
Yep.
there's different memberships that, Clock is one. There's, others as well that folks could tap into to collaborate to learn more from folks.
And developing that, what I think you just nailed on in a few minutes ago was the leadership mindset. And maybe that's something we can dig into separately, deeper, and maybe something I would like to explore on the podcast further. The having the leadership mindset of I was hired into this role to lead the department, not
Mhm.
come in and wait for direction and wait to support and
Right.
wait to hear what the roadmap is, right? There is a mentality, a mindset that you come in with that's I expect
Yeah.
to be dictating how we do things. And here's my
Yeah.
vision, and here's how we're going to go execute on it. Yeah, that's really key. We talked about a lot of things, Don. I learned a lot. Your leadership skills, your background is very impressive. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
All
Take
right.
care.
Good to see you. Everyone, thanks for listening.